we're kind of starting at the end of their relationship, or at least the end of what we know of it. It's an interesting scene. But first, I kind of want to start at the beginning of the relationship and see how we got to the text this morning. Michal was David's first wife, and their marriage was, you could say it was contractual. It was a political marriage, even a celebrity marriage in a sense. David was this young, good-looking star. He'd just taken down Goliath. He was a great warrior, a very eligible bachelor. And Michal was the second daughter of King Saul, a beautiful princess. And Saul was the current king and was really a pretty insecure dude, especially when it came to David. He was very threatened by David. And so he had this idea of how to get rid of David. He says, hey, David, you can marry my daughter, but you have to go and kill 100 Philistines. And so his idea is he's going to go and pick a fight with some Philistines. He's going to get killed by these guys, and he's not going to be a problem for me any longer. I'll get rid of him. And so David says, I'll see your 100 Philistines, and I'll raise you 200. And so he goes out and kills 100, and then just for fun, kills 100 more because God's on his side. And he says, hey, here you go, ready to marry your daughter. So that plan did not work out very well. But this stuff, looking at this relationship, it's like the stuff of reality TV shows. Today, this couple would have had the paparazzi following them around. They would have had tons of followers on Instagram. There would have been wives mad at their husbands, being like, "You didn't kill any Philistines for me. You know, why can't you be more like David?" But it's really an interesting thing to note here, is it says in this text. This is in 1 Samuel, the story I'm referencing, that Michal loved David. She loved David. And really, this is the first time that it speaks in the scripture of a woman loving the man. In this culture, that didn't really matter. What mattered is that the man loves the woman, and then she'll have to marry him. The woman didn't really have a say that often. And so it's actually pretty interesting that Michal has the say here. Maybe because she was a princess, but she's the one telling Saul, hey, I love David. I want this man. And it's interesting because at the beginning of the story, she loves David. But then in 2 Samuel, in our scripture reading, she despises him. So what changes? How do they go from her loving him to despising him? One thing that scripture leaves out doesn't say anything about David loving Michal. It's actually really sad. You can see from the scripture, he didn't care for her. He wasn't interested in her at all. She was just a pawn. She was someone that he could use and abuse. And there's a phrase in sociology called the principle of least interest. And it's this concept that it's kind of sad, and I don't want to say this is a hard and fast rule, and it's always true, but you've probably seen this before. And it's this idea that in relationships, dating relationships, friendship relationships, even business relationships, the person who is least interested in keeping that relationship up ends up having the most power in that relationship. And maybe you've experienced this when one person's really invested, they're pursuing the other person, they're more willing to do what that other person wants to do. They're more willing to do whatever it takes to get their attention. So you may think about it like, in the dating phase, it's kind of an unfair stereotype, but you probably heard this before. They say men are hunters, right? And so men are hunting their lady, and they're gonna pursue her, and they're gonna do all the nice things. They're gonna do all the sweet romantic dates. They're gonna watch the romantic comedies they don't really want to watch. But then once they get married, they've got their kill. They've got them locked up. They quit pursuing. Right? Have you heard this? That's not totally fair. I don't do that at all. But that's kind of this thinking that we have. And so you can see how in some relationships that starts to happen where we kind of quit, and the women can do it too. We kind of quit pursuing each other. We kind of feel like, we got this, it's fine. And the person in that couple that's the least interested in maintaining it, they lose power. And they'll do whatever they can to get the attention of that other person. And so you can see, because David's not that interested in this, and just because he's a man in the culture, he's got all the power in this relationship. And you can see him use and abuse it. And it's really pretty sad. And so I guess thinking about that, you can maybe think in relationships where you've been on one side or the other on this. Maybe it was a friendship relationship when you really want to be close friends with these people and you can tell, hey, maybe they're just not having it. And it's kind of painful, but it also is one of those things where you might need to realize, well, maybe I need to move on. Maybe I need to be happy with where this friendship's at and move to something else. In a marriage relationship, if you found that you've got to this point in a marriage relationship where, hey, one person doesn't seem like they're that committed to the relationship anymore, if you're that person, you need to kind of realize that, and you need to maybe start pursuing your spouse again, doing those things to woo them, thinking about their love languages again, communicating your love to them, not in the ways that are meaningful to you, but ways that are meaningful to them. But David, he was a user. He had this power over her, and you can kind of see a couple of things that he does. In this next episode in the scriptures, you see Saul is out to kill David. And Michal helps him escape. She stuffs the bed to make it look like he's there when these guys come to kill David. And then she's lying for him, really going against her father's wishes. So she's really being played as a pawn and manipulated and being used against her own dad. And then whenever David returns to when he comes back, he's more interested in hanging out with her brother than he is her. And once David becomes public enemy number one and he's on the run, King Saul takes his daughter Michal and marries her to another man. And whenever David becomes king, he says, hey, I want my wife back. Not because he loves her, not because he's interested in this relationship, not because he misses her, but it's all political. He needs her to make a legit claim to be king. It's his right. It's what he wants. And so he makes her come back. And as she's coming back to be his wife, her other husband is following behind her crying. And it's really a sad scene. Because to me, it's like, well, that's a husband that actually wanted her. That was a husband that actually was pursuing her, that actually cared for her. And you're ripping her away, and you don't even want her. You're not even interested. It's pretty cold. And so that's how David's using this power he has as king, this political power he has, this power he has over her. And so I want you to think about that this morning is, how do you use your power? There are probably some people, we don't like thinking in terms of power, maybe influence. How do you use your influence that you have over people, your kids, maybe people who look up to you, maybe it's your spouse. It's not totally fair to say the way you treat people that you have power over you is like one of the main ways to see someone's character. That's a fair statement, but David, he treats some people that he has power over pretty well, but not in this case. But think about those people you have power and influence over. How are you using that? Are you using that to bless them and bless others? Or are you using it to build yourself up? Or are you manipulating people to get what you want? And this happens in dating relationships, right? Whenever, we got a good-looking group of kids here with lots of game, especially Caleb. Lots of game, right? And so there's going to be kids interested in him. And maybe you've all been in this situation where someone's interested in you and you're not interested in them. Let them down gently. Be nice. Don't use and abuse them. Don't push them away. Tell them really kindly why I really just like you as a friend. Don't use that power you have, because I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen where, oh, this person likes me, I'm going to tease them and mess with them and use and abuse them. And don't do that. Don't exploit the power you have. And I think here what we need to see, we see David doing the opposite, is he's viewing people as a means to an end. As political tools. Or maybe sometimes we view people as obstacles. You're in the way of what I really want. And we need to have a much more humane way of looking at people. And at some point, Michal figures out she's just a pawn. She's just someone who's being used. And so she resents David. And we really see that come out in the text that John read for us. So the Ark of the Covenant, it's being triumphantly brought into the city. And David, this is to me the funnest part of the story. We're not going to unpack it too much. He's wearing little. And he's worshipfully and triumphantly dancing around in front of the ark as it's being brought into the city. It's hard to envision what his dancing looked like, but there was an old King David movie in the 80s with Richard Gere. Ladies, some of you ladies are like, oh, I remember this one. And it shows him dancing in front of the ark. I've never actually seen the whole movie. I did go to YouTube and watch this scene. And some YouTuber took the Usher song In the Club and superimposed that over his dancing in front of the ark. Well worth a watch. Anyway, it's hard to envision what this actually looked like. But it says that Michal is watching from the window and despises him in her heart. And I kind of get it, and then he shows up, whenever she shows up and he talks to her, she says like, look, you're dancing around like a commoner in front of all these slave girls. And so I think there's a lot of reasons she could be mad right now. You've lowered yourself. That was not kingly at all. You look just like some common dude, some common man, which is interesting because a lot of times political leaders want to look that way. I'm one of you. You can trust me. I'm one of the boys. And so some would view that as a good thing. Maybe she's a little jealous. She's mentioning who's looking. Look, all these other ladies are seeing you like that. I don't like that. And I mean, evidently, to me, it may have been embarrassing. Like, you looked like a fool dancing out there, David. That was really embarrassing. Like, I could see all of this being the case. And so I get why she busts on him. But evidently from the text, that was not the right route to take. David basically says, look, if dancing half naked in front of the ark is wrong, then I don't want to be right. Because he says, look, I was worshiping God. I was, and if I look silly, I'll humble myself for God. I might even look sillier than that, if that's what it takes. Because it was for God, it wasn't about you. And so I think it's and there's a lot of important theological points you could make about that. But I really want to focus on the relationship here. And I think it's interesting, he's got other wives. What did they think when they saw him doing this? Maybe they thought, what a great king. I love that he's not too good to worship in that way. I love that he's not too good to express who he really is, that he's willing to show all this love for God, and I hope that it spills over to the people. And I hope the people are willing to worship in these ways like that. I love that he's willing to lower his pride to honor God. I love that we have this humble king. So it's kind of about perspective. I think for all Michal has been through with David, that she was being used and abused. She was just a pawn. She despised him. Maybe a better word, she resented him. So she saw everything David did through a different lens than maybe some of the other wives did. Unfortunately, when you get to the point of resenting someone, you have a negative take on everything that they do. And so it says up here resentment in marriage, but this applies for anything, right? Someone you resent could be a friend or an ex-friend, could be somebody in here, could be a family member. When you resent someone, others might see what they're doing as a good thing, but when you resent them, if there's a way to see the bad in it, you're going to see it. If you resent them, if there's a way to be offended by their actions, you're going to be offended by it. If there's good in their actions and you resent them, you're going to be blinded to it. You're not going to see it at all. You're going to say, oh, they're just doing that for looks. You'll find a way to cheapen it. So I'll ask you this morning, is there someone that you view like that? Someone that you have got to the point of resenting them. It's hard to see any value in them. It's hard to see any good in them. Do you have a relationship that's soured so much to the point where you despise them? You can only see the bad. You never see the good in it. That's something you need to address this morning. If you feel that there is a resentment in your marriage, you really need to address it. And I think everybody at some point probably feels that. Some angst, some anger towards your spouse. I know a lot of us are at this point in our marriages where lives get busy. We're worried about money. We're worried about work. We're worried about kids. We're just trying to keep our heads above water. And so there's things in our marriage that we need to address that it's getting put on the back burner. There's issues that we need to address, but we just can't because we got too many other things that we have to take care of. And I'm telling you this morning, please don't let those issues fester. Please don't ignore those things. Make space to address it, even if you have to say no to something, even if you need to cancel plans. And so I'll say this, I believe in marriage counseling. Like, I think it's a good thing. And I think if you go to marriage counseling, it doesn't mean you're going to get a divorce or that you have this horrible marriage. In fact, the one thing people do say is that marriages wait too long to go to marriage counseling. Do it sooner. Doesn't mean you have a horrible marriage. Doesn't mean you're horrible people. It just means you're in a rut. Maybe you need some outside perspective. Maybe you need some little bit of reffing, a little bit of coaching. And if you need a recommendation, for a marriage counselor, my information is in the bulletin. You can reach out to the office. It'll be real discreet. We have some good names out there. Jonathan Cogburn's not a marriage counselor anymore, but I bet he's another one who has some good resources for you for that. Don't be afraid to do that. I think it's, we've been there. I have been there. We've gone to marriage counseling. I think it can be a good thing. There are other things you could do too. You can, if you feel there's resentment, if you feel there's some real issues there, you got to lay it out in the open. Become self-aware enough. You got to retrain your brain to change the way you're viewing people, to find again what you appreciated about this person. You need some empathy. You need to attempt to listen and understand. You need to show gratitude. You know what the opposite of gratitude is? Resentment. Resentment is the opposite of gratitude. And so you need to find that gratitude again. You need to be willing to apologize. You need to be willing to forgive. And then another thing that I think really, when we talk about marriages, I think this part gets neglected a lot. Whenever marriages are in rough patches, whenever you're fighting, whenever it's difficult, you talk about conflict resolution and how we can work through some of these problems. But then the other side of that is the reparative side. I think it's so important to have fun together, to invest in your marriage, to go on dates, to go do that getaway, to do something new together, because that starts repairing what was lost or what was broken in those tough parts of marriage. And so I wonder if the situation with David dancing around in front of the ark and Michal just sitting there looking mad at him, what if she went out and danced with him? How would that have changed things? Unfortunately, the relationship, it didn't end well. But if you're struggling, I believe yours can. And again, not just marriage. I think there's a lot of different relationships out here that are broken, that are hurting, between siblings, between friends, between ex-friends, maybe different people in here. It may be in a rough patch, but there really can be healing there. It can get better. But it's going to take empathy. It's going to take humility. It's going to take admitting that you were wrong. It's going to take a forgiveness that you really feel like that person doesn't deserve. Giving forgiveness that's not deserved. That's what it's going to take. It's going to take a lot of grace. But I want to offer you hope this morning for any hurting relationships that you have. And we want to help you work through that. If the church can help, we want to. And so, and really, marriage counseling, I believe in it. That's a good thing. We can help hook you up with that. But there's also an invitation to Christ this morning. If you have any need, your church family is here. We want this to be a place of healing. So if you want to give your life to Christ or have any other need, we invite you to come now. As together we stand and sing.